I want to start off by saying thank you. So thank you. It's nice to see some faces that I saw yesterday too, so that gives me like a little bit of an idea that I did okay job, at least okay enough that you're willing to come and spend a little bit more time with me. That makes me happy. Oh, I also see some more faces of color. That's a nice change from the first day. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about, and I'm not going to be as locked to the podium today as I was before, so sorry, Paul. I still love you. Some of what I want to talk about and some of what I want to deal with requires us to rehash a little bit. So for anybody that wasn't able to see what we talked about in terms of some of the foundational benefits of mentoring, I want us to move through that. We're going to move relatively quickly. I'm going to ask you to reflect. And some of that reflection for me is really about the opportunity for people's voices to be heard. So a lot of the work that I do around equity and diversity is really helping minoritized and marginalized populations have voice. And some of the ways that we mistake those kind of ideas is that we don't recognize the voice of everybody. So as much as minoritized populations need voice, we need to hear the voices of majority populations. There's no progress that's going to be made that's going to be sustainable if everybody isn't pulling together, working together to create a culture that moves in the right direction. And so I'm going to be asking you to reflect, but part of that reflection is also going to be asking you to share. And so this room isn't necessarily the most conducive to forming groups, so it's nice, those of you who have sat directly next to somebody, you got quick conversation buddies, there will be some opportunities to kind of turn around. But what I'm asking you guys to do and what I want to set as a general expectation for this space, and even for those of us that are joining online, is please bring your whole self to the conversation. Part of what we need to do in our time together today, and 2 hours is a really short period of time. I forget that all the time because as a professor I teach 3-hour classes and I'm always at the conclusion like, there's like 20 things I wanted to say still. And so I'm gonna have to cut some reflection time shorter than I would like, but what I'm asking you to do and what I'm asking us to do as a community that's being formed around what I think is a really imperative and important topic is to bring your whole self to the conversation, to share your experiences, to share them inside these walls, to share them outside these walls, because a lot of the conversations that I hope to initiate today are conversations that you might be having in smaller enclaves or you might be having amongst the people in your unit or your division, but making them plain and making them public so that we understand how this is operating throughout the organization is going to be one of the important and like hopefully powerful takeaways from our time together. So again, my name is Michael Stephen Williams. I am faculty in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis at the University of Illinois. Or not Illinois, the University of Missouri. What am I doing? I know AJ from the University of Illinois. We used to work there together, so I'm getting crossed up. I've got a lot of university connections. Did my PhD at The Ohio State too, so we can go ahead and get that out of the way. And this session differs from yesterday's session because it's more really about that application. And so I do want to start a little bit with just a reminder of why mentoring matters. So those of you who got the 2-hour exposure yesterday, I do want to take a little bit of time just to remind. So socialization, and socialization being one of the key pieces of any positive and strong mentoring relationship, because socialization is the way that you help people become members of a community. And so if you're in the mentoring role or if you're in the mentee role, which is the preferred language, what you're working to do is, as the mentor, you're working to share the attitudes, the norms, the values, the expectations around work, like how work gets done, and some of those informal information sharing places, like to demystify an organization, to help people understand that you, even in your role as a mentor, have your issues, have your concerns, have the ways in which you wish that the organization could be a little bit better. That socialization piece is positive, and the information sharing can range from positive information to negative information. There's consistent and long lists, and I'm going to be sharing some resource lists for those of you who are interested. Evidence that good developmental relationships lead to increased learning. And so people learn faster, and they're more readily able to apply what they've learned in various situations, and particularly in novel situations, when they have good role models, when they have good mentors. As many of you probably know, good mentoring is also directly connected to career advancement. And so when you have somebody that can advocate for you, that can sponsor you, that can avail you to new and different opportunities, people who are well mentored are much more likely to get raises, much more likely to get income that's in line with their skills and ability and their experience in the field. And they're also more likely to be in line for promotion, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Psychological adjustment is another important piece. And so the psychological adjustment piece too, especially in a room full of scientists, it's about helping people develop the identity. And so part of who you are is what you do. And when you're a scientist, that work is part of your identity. So the conversations you have with people who understand your discipline, the conversations you have with people who speak the same, even if it's, I remember, so my distant life was as a computer engineer and programmer, and I don't reflect positively on it. That's why I do this now. But it was because it was hard, and semicolons are evil. But the idea and like even the language. So I remember when I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, I actually started a master's degree in computer engineering before I exited, much to my financial dismay. But I remember the character of the conversations that I would have with people that are in my classes and like the people that speak my language are completely different from even people that I loved. And so like this idea of psychological adjustment is important because part of the mentor and mentee relationship is really helping somebody to assume an identity, like helping them to join a professional community. And then this is aspirational because that's not always what people want, but this idea of preparation for leadership. And so people that are well mentored are also prepared to take on leadership roles. I was doing some work this morning with LASP, and they, on numerous occasions, the same name kept coming up. So they're like, Bruce is great. Bruce is a great mentor. Bruce is a great mentor. And I was like, who is this Bruce? And they're like, oh, he runs the whole thing. That to me was exciting because like, oh, okay, if this is a leader that people can believe in, that they can look and they say the top of the organization is somebody that does a good job mentoring, and that people that are showing up at all different levels of the organization are saying that and referring to that person as a good role model, that's excellent. But it's also directly connected to preparation for leadership. So this person is modeling behavior that is going to spread throughout the organization. They're part and parcel of the development of a culture that's going to be great. And there are people who are even saying like, yeah, when this person leaves, like I'm leaving too. My hope is that the culture, and we'll talk about like kind of the microsystem, exosystem view of mentoring, but my hope is that there isn't just one person like that within organizations, that there are multiple meaningful mentoring relationships that people can take advantage of. But preparation for leadership is if leaders and people who are in position of power are using that power to uplift people, to make sure that they're challenged, to make sure that they have the skills to continue to advance. It's also really important organizationally because like you do succession planning. One of the biggest ways that organizations fail is they don't have, if they lose somebody, they lose that knowledge, that local knowledge, that scientific hard knowledge, then they're screwed. Like some projects just get taken offline, some ideas just have to be kind of pushed to the side, and we forget the role of a mentor. And I do think that some of the ethical dimensions of mentoring, like even though I'm not gonna go too deep, allow me to soapbox for just a brief moment. If you are withholding information, skills, training, ability from somebody that you are supporting, then I wouldn't call that mentorship. To the extent that you can, everything that you know, everything that you can share, every way that you can protect the people that you're charged to mentor, you should be offering that. And so to me, the best version of mentoring, and so now I have the privilege, I have 6 doctoral students and 2 master's students on my research team. And it was one of the major reasons why I moved from where I was teaching at Baruch College in New York City to Mizzou, was the opportunity to socialize doctoral students. If I'm doing my job correctly, they should be able to take my job. Like that's how I feel. Like I want that level of skill, that level of ability. There's no skin off my back if my students are better than me. And in fact, given all the experiences that I went through and that I had in order to get where I am, and all the game that I'm hopefully giving them as a good mentor, they should be better than me because I'm answering the questions. I'm demystifying the process. I'm telling them in advance, like, don't do that. I think there's an old Dave Chappelle stand-up that I really like, and it's like an old black dude pops out, like, don't do that. That's a 5 to 10. Like, that's how I feel oftentimes, like, whoa. Like, trust me, that service opportunity you think is a good idea? No, nobody's going to care. It's going to be one line on your CV, and you're not going to write, and you're not going to sleep. So a lot of the protections that I didn't give, I want to offer that to my students so that they can have an even better experience than I did. And so this preparation for leadership it might be that they don't aspire to the same kind of career that I do, but I should still be preparing them to lead in whatever space that they show up in. And so now, like the first reflection for me, and we're going to keep this one relatively short, but I want you to write. And so part of the writing process, and let me be like explicit about this, because sometimes you ask people to write and they're like, no. Part of why I'm asking you to write and why I hope we have paper, I'd be happy to run it to you myself, is because I want artifacts of this experience and this conversation for you so you can come back to it, you can think about it, you can reflect on it. If there are additional questions that you have to ask, feel free. My contact information is available. I'm happy to support and continue the conversation and kind of push on it. But I do want you to just write it down, like take a moment to reflect. And so think about your organization. What are your relationships like? You know, what are your relationships like with the key members of the organization? And would you consider anybody within these walls a mentor? And if you would, how did you go about it? Like, how did you develop that relationship? Putting 2 minutes on the clock. How are we doing? How many of you had somebody that you could write down? It's pretty good. Is anybody willing to share how they developed that relationship? And name the person. I want to hear these good relationships.
Hi. I just came to UCAR, but one of the key mentors is institutionally. That's how it developed, and then the other one is organically. So my prior job, the new director of NCAR, was a deputy director, and so organically I worked with him before I got here, and then institutionally the organization hired the inaugural director, Tom, who's my other mentor.
Awesome. I get one more. Don't be shy. Thank you.
I am actually from the University of Colorado, and I work at the NOAA building, just for context. I wrote down several people, and I would consider them all very weak mentors. One of the reasons I mentor is because I haven't been mentored. But one in particular was Susan Avery, who was the director of series for many years, and she put my name up for a couple different committees, and that made a difference in my life. It got me connected to a whole bunch of people. Yeah, it just started to broaden my network and gave me different perspectives on working in the field and also on how relationships at work could be, perspective on what my situation was.
Excellent. So we started to touch on these, and so I would synthesize and like kind of shrink down what you guys offered, even though it was much more robust. But what you offered is really about career mobility to me in a way, because if you hadn't done a good job in the previous iteration of your relationship with this person, you likely would not be here. And so that's always nice. Like, oh, I did a good job working with this person in this previous place, so now they hooked me up with something new over here. And your story is actually one that I love, because there's a lot of self-awareness that's required to become the type of mentor that you want to be. And some of that self-awareness is recognition that you haven't received some of the things that would have really facilitated your success. And so even that, the networking aspect specifically, like that's one of the major benefits that comes. And so somebody that exposes you to opportunities, somebody that considers your name and puts you in front of people that you otherwise wouldn't be in front of, that's really important. So just to explicitly revisit some of the benefits that accrue to mentees, performance and productivity. Huge body of research in fields, academic, sports, pretty much every field of human performance. People who are mentored perform better. They perform better, they're more productive, they're more likely to stay, they have longer tenures within organizations. They have opportunities and get pushed into networks. And so the example of having your name offered for committee work, so I'm a faculty member, like that's a cardinal sin. Like, don't put my name in anything. If I'm not at the meeting, I don't exist. But the idea that somebody is thinking about you, somebody's gonna care, somebody's gonna have enough of an idea about your skills and your abilities that they know the type of opportunities that would be valuable to you. That's a really important piece. And so employment opportunities, you hit that one right on the head. So, oh, I know somebody great. I love being able to do that. That's my aspiration for anybody that I work for, that I train, that I can, when I hear about opportunities or hear about, oh, there's a faculty position coming open over there. Well, how about you wait a year? Because I'll have a student graduating. That's gonna be awesome. We spoke about it a little bit earlier, but like income and promotion. And this is a really important piece. And so institutional and organizational mobility, both within organizations. So people that have been trained to take on the role that their supervisor is playing, but also people that have been trained to take on more advanced roles outside. So whether you want to move up or you want to move out, mentoring is really key to being able to do that and to being able to have your income match your skill level. This is particularly important along some intersections of identity. So those of you familiar with any kind of literature about the gender pay gap, for example, this piece of it, one of the scientifically proven ways that women are able to overcome the gender pay gap is through strong mentoring and strong connections up the chain, both inside organizations and outside of organizations. And then satisfaction and reduced stress and role conflict. And so for me, what I'd share is one of the ways that stress and role conflict really played out in my own life was as a doctoral student, I had a young child. So I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old now. So, oh, I'm getting old. Whew. But when I started my PhD in 2011, my son was 1. And my partner, my ex-wife now, but still partner and everything because we co-parent and we're on the same faculty, she was writing her dissertation. And so I was doing classes, she was writing her dissertation, and she was also primary parent for all things related to my son. And so realizing how much a screaming baby, even though they're like cute and fat and like all that cool stuff, how much that compromises your ability to concentrate and write, I wanted to figure out ways that I could do more to be supportive. And it felt like to me at times that I would have to choose between going to my research team meetings and like being the husband and the father that I wanted to be. And so I had, just in an offhand manner, mentioned it to my my advisor, who also happened to be my mentor, because they're not always the same. And he was like, "Oh, bring him to the research team meetings." Stress level significantly reduced. Well, in some respects, because like my son would just be like banging on stuff and like trying to break things and slapping people's laptops and like almost spilling water on stuff. But he became a part of like my cohort of doctoral students. Like he's a part of our experience. So people just used to, oh, he's about to knock something over, grab. You know, he's sitting on anybody on the team, like he's very familiar with, recognizes in pictures, even to this day. But the ability for me to not have to navigate the conflict between the roles, like to push on, oh, I have to choose between being a husband and a father or being a good doctoral student. Like that was really powerful. And so that was one of the ways that the benefits of a thoughtful mentor who recognizes the salient aspects of my identity really served me. So this is a quicker reflection. And I'd prefer that you guys turn to talk to each other if you're in close enough proximity. But I think one of the things that we don't think about and we don't spend enough time with is the benefits, like the other side of the kind of mentoring. The benefits don't just flow to the person that's being mentored. They also flow to the mentor as well. And so I want you guys to think about, what do you have to offer as a mentor? And like, how would mentoring benefit you? And so we got a little sneak preview before. It was like, because I can be better than the people that didn't mentor me. But take a moment to just think about, like, what is it that you have to offer? And I'll put conversation time on the clock. We'll do like 3 or 4 minutes. All right, my alarm went off, but very quietly, so I'll have to mic it back up. I love the energy of the conversations. And so rather than ask people to share out themselves, what I would like this time is to change the model a little bit. And I want somebody who's willing to volunteer something awesome that they heard from whoever they were talking to. What are people good at?
Come on, y'all. It's a chance to brag on your friends.
Katie's good at helping people recognize that they belong in places where they've never been, to be confident.
It's a good one. It's an awesome one. Give me at least one more. There's too much conversation going on for this level of reticence right now.
I like Jason's point, and he mentioned that one of the things that mentees really value the most is like to give them the confidence that they can do something. And yeah, so basically giving them the confidence.
Yeah, instilling that confidence. That's a big one. All right, one more. That side of the room.
Out of the room. You're on the spot.
Lorena said she know, yeah, because he runs the writing workshop, so she knows need how to organize things and prepare herself to the workshop.
Oh,
then
excellent.
will better for the students for teaching.
That's great. Thank you. So you guys started to hit on a bunch of these as well. I love the different focuses. So instilling confidence, that's really about that psychosocial support we talked about yesterday. Helping people see themselves, in this case, as scientists, helping them see themselves as a member of a community, helping them see themselves as competent, because that's one of the things that can be difficult. In social cognitive theory, there's a concept called self-efficacy. And basically, it's so deeply connected to all different forms of performance. And if people feel efficacious, they usually do a great job. This idea is directly related to that idea of instilling confidence, because if somebody feels confident and then that lets them try, it also lets them fail productively. And so if somebody makes a mistake and they have somebody that's there to tell them, hey, everybody makes mistakes, I've been down that road before, they're much more likely to be resilient, to go back, to try again. Specific skills. So somebody that's well organized, I'm admittedly terrible with email. And so I think about that all the time. Like, who can I have that's a role model around email that's not named AJ? She just glared at me. And so because you're good at something, if you're good at putting together workshops, if you're really dope at PowerPoint, if you take really good pictures. I have a student who was a photojournalism undergrad, and I feel like I shimmer. If you guys have ever seen this is a I have young kids moment for me, so indulge me for a second. There's a movie where I think it's Moana. Yeah. There's like this crab, and he's got like all the shiny stuff on his back. He has a song, Shiny. That's how I feel when I get pictures taken of me by the student. But like recognizing that people have unique skills and they have unique contributions to make to a team, and finding ways for those unique talents to shine, and connecting them in meaningful ways to the overall mission, or what I would like to kind of refer to as the commander's intent for whatever the mission and goals for your team are really important. So beyond the benefits of a job well done, like that idea of fulfillment, like if you know that you're good at something, I'm good at making people feel like they belong. I'm good at making people feel like they can do it. I'm good at like supporting resiliency. That's fulfilling. It feels good when you see people that you care about, that you invest in, do well. And so that satisfaction, that fulfillment is an important thing that mentors get. Professional rejuvenation. And so I use the example for me right now. A lot of my students that are coming in, I learned how to do quantitative research using what are now becoming outdated software programs. So like first it was SAS, then it was SPSS. Learned how to do structural equation modeling on Lizral. None of that matters anymore because everybody just uses R. And so all my students are learning R in their classes, and I don't know R. So I'm forced so that I don't become irrelevant and be like, oh, run this analysis for me. I can't check it if they're doing it in a language that I don't understand. Like I can't tell if they're, meeting the appropriate assumptions of any of the stuff that we're doing. So like now, in order to be relevant for my students and develop them as quantitative researchers, like I have to professionally rejuvenate. I have to be dedicated to my own professional development so that I can continue to serve as a mentor. And like that role, that idea, that connection to being current, to being up to date in your field, that comes from working in mentoring situations is really powerful and important too. I think the other piece of it, and I was having an anecdotal conversation with Katie before the meeting, is networking. And so oftentimes when we think about networking in a mentor-mentee relationship, it's about making sure the mentee is exposed and like they have opportunities to network. But it's also an opportunity for people who are in the mentoring role to reestablish and deepen their network as well. Because if you know a whole bunch of people, but they don't like you, then they're not going to want to talk to your students. They're not going to work with you. And it's a nice reminder that in order for me to offer the kind of networking connections and the professional development and the opportunities to meet people and see people who show up in different ways and with different social addresses in the work that I do, and for you guys in the work that you do, we have to invest in our network too. And so some of that networking is within the organization, so that we know where to go, we know who to ask. Some of the most powerful things that a mentor can do is admit when they don't know the answer, but know who to go to get the answer from. And so that's a really valuable part of networking that often gets overlooked. That's powerful for the mentoring side of things too. If you are doing a good job as a mentor, you're likely going to become friends, because any meaningful mentoring relationship just deepens because it extends over time. And when you've established a really strong mentoring relationship, they seldom have meaningful temporal boundaries, meaning that like once somebody feels like they're your mentee or you're their mentor, like doesn't matter. Oh, I haven't talked to you in 2 years, but I need a recommendation tomorrow. I'm comfortable with that because once it's established, it's kind of like, okay, you're right, I got you. But that idea of friendship and support, but also the mutuality of that friendship and support. The fact that people that you do a good job mentoring are also going to be looking out for you as a mentor, like, hey, my mentor would be great for this. Like, they'd be great to talk about this, or their expertise really meets well in this area. So you're getting some of those benefits too. And then if somebody has a reputation for talent development, so Bruce over at LASP, who now I know his name and I will remember forever, because apparently he does a good job, because they're like, Bruce. When you have a reputation for talent development, it serves your larger organization, because you're going to have access to the best and the brightest because you start to develop a positive reputation. Like, I want to go work with somebody that I know is going to put me in a position to be successful. And so in a way, sports analogies can be hackneyed, but I think about like coaching trees in certain sports, like, oh, people who learned under this person, like they're getting good jobs everywhere. It's the same in academia. It's the same in science. There's a stat that I love from, the paper is pretty old. It's from like 1972. And somebody probably could get an easy publication by updating it. But at the time that they did the study, over half of the Nobel laureates from the United States were mentored either in postdoctoral positions as undergrads or in grad positions by Nobel laureates. So like the idea that you can transfer excellence, the idea that like excellence breeds excellence is really important. And so when you get a reputation for doing a good job with this, it contributes in a meaningful way to organizational health overall. This is another moment for reflection. And what I would ask is that you guys try to create like a little bit bigger groups for this, because the conversation will be a little bit more robust that way. And I want you to think about the organization now, because now we're going to move into the weeds of what we're doing here. And so ask yourself, is the culture in your organization conducive to forming strong mentoring relationships? I want you, again, like, pleased with the vulnerability and the honesty and the truth so that we can kind of push forward. If yes, how? Like, what's going on that's working? What's working well? And this is the nice way of saying what's wrong. But where are the opportunities for improvement, that you can identify? No matter how long you've been in an organization, you can start to get a sense of the climate and the culture. But yeah, where are the opportunities for improvement? Like, what is going right here along these ideas? Oh, go. That was so not loud enough. That's the timer. So I want to get us back together. I want. I saw that a bunch of the conversations were still going, and I always, as a teacher and a professor and somebody that knows that the best way for adult learners to learn is to talk to other adults, I'm always hesitant to stop good conversations, but I don't want us to miss out on content. I'm not going to have a share out just yet. I want some of the issues and some of the ideas that you guys talked about in your groups to kind of stay with you as we talk about best practices. And we can see how we can map some of the issues that you guys raised, because I heard issues. How we can map some of the issues that were raised in the smaller groups onto some of what I'm going to share, and also how we can think together about anything that isn't covered explicitly. If you have an idea, and I want to invite you guys to use the writing utensils again now, if there's an idea that came up in your group or something that you want to make sure that we discuss, please write that down now, so that I can make sure that we save a little bit of time towards the end to circle back and attack some of these ideas together. So I'm going to jump really quick back to the bold claim that I made at the conclusion of the talk yesterday, because I really do believe it. But deliberate intentional mentoring is one of the most important commitments that an organization can make to its people, period. And so I hope that in some of what we reviewed and some of what you've been thinking about, I've convinced you of that, at least a little bit, if you weren't already trending in that direction. And now what I want to kind of move into is some of the strategies and some of the emergent work about how to do this well. There are a lot of obstacles to mentoring and mentoring well. And so whether you're mentoring students, whether you're mentoring new members of an organization, there are a lot of ways that it can go wrong. And some of the ways that it can go wrong are implicit. We don't even know. You don't know that you're excluding somebody. You don't know that the language that you're using is upsetting. You don't know that you've offended somebody. You don't know that you've created events that people don't feel welcome to come to. And so one of the ways that I teach in Missouri, and that's been interesting for me because the political climate is exactly the opposite of when I taught in New York City. And so one of the things that I've had to learn is how to invite people with conservative political views into the conversation, particularly conversations around race and diversity. Because I'm so strong and passionate, it's like, this is BS and blah, blah, blah. It's very easy for those people to feel like, oh, I'm not welcome here. I might be in this class and I might be in this program, but I'm not welcome in this conversation. People don't want to hear what I have to say. And that's one of the ways that we rob each other of the perspective that could help us uplift everybody. But because we don't attend to it and we don't talk about it, we don't make plain kind of these opaque ways that we disinvite people from conversations. We can get messed up sometimes. And so I like to think of a lot of different obstacles to mentoring. Some of them are related to social address, but some of them are also just related to gaps. Sometimes people don't mentor well within an organization because they never learned how to mentor. If it's not a priority, if it's not something that is celebrated, if it's not something that people put intentional professional development, time, energy, and resources toward, then it's easy for it to continue to go by the wayside. And if people are doing their job and their job is good enough and projects are getting completed and sales are being made, however the job manifests itself, it's easy to think that you're doing a good job when you're really not. I use the word culture to refer to every aspect of being a member of an organization. Every aspect of, like what it means. When do people typically show up? When do people typically leave? When you go to lunch, who do you eat with? Is it the same group all the time? Is it different group? What happens between units? Do you hang out with and eat with and talk with people that are outside of the unit that you work in? When are there opportunities for everybody to come together? What do we celebrate? Do we celebrate birthdays? Do we celebrate anniversaries? Do we celebrate the birth of children? I was walking around the halls and it's like, baby, baby, baby. I was like, huh. Like how many people know? Like how many people know what's going on? How people's lives are being changed because a child changes your life in so many ways. Like those are all elements of the culture. What are the expectations? Are you in a high-performing organization? And it's not always high-performing, but sometimes the expectations tend to skew that way. Are you in an organization where people are afraid to take maternity and paternity leave because if they are gone for too long, they might be passed over for future opportunities? Are you in an organization that is really supportive and is like, I better not see you for 6 months. Like, don't even try to walk through the door. Like, these are all aspects of the culture that need to be mined and thought about, but they can also be obstacles to mentoring. Because if we're not explicit and we're not intentional about making space for the conversations, then they often won't be had. Culture is also really deeply connected to this idea of trust. And so I really like the sharing from earlier about you're good at instilling confidence. And so instilling confidence means that you're also good at building trust. Because if you don't trust somebody, it doesn't matter. A compliment doesn't mean anything. So I think of it, the way I think of it, like the crude way that I think of it is, I have the benefit of being in the company of my wife and ex-wife, and I feel like they're pretty attractive, and they get catcalls and they get hit on walking down the street. And they've developed this armor where it's like, I don't even hear it. Like, it's not even, I was like, what? I'm ready to slap people. Like, disrespect, you see me here? You see the muscles? Like, but they don't even hear it. I think that way of interacting sometimes can be part of the culture too. Like, if somebody doesn't trust you, then your compliments are gonna just zoom right over. It's gonna go over their head. If somebody doesn't trust the people in the organization, they're less likely to share when they need help. They're less likely to share when they feel like they fail at something. And so we have to think about the ways that our culture is inviting people to be full participants in an organization. Race and racism is a big one. And so I think about in-car, U-car, and just like Boulder, Colorado generally, and like what I see navigating the streets. And I'm like, it's pretty white. And so it might be that you have really strong relationships within these walls and people that understand you and ask meaningful questions about your experiences in your life. But there's an entire other world outside of these walls in this beautiful mountain with the awesome picture windows, at least upstairs. And how are we intentionally engaging conversations so we understand how people are experiencing life outside of the walls? Like, that's part of being a citizen. Not just a citizen of the organization, but a citizen of the larger surrounding community. Sex, gender expression, sexual orientation. There are a lot of different aspects of people's social addresses that need to be attended to, and that if we don't take the time to ask the questions, we don't take the time to make the personal connections, we don't take the time to get to know each other, it's really difficult to shift the culture.
I really appreciate that it's like we want to ask questions of people so we can know more and I guess be slightly less ignorant about other cultures or whatever. But I guess it could be hard to ask questions because maybe you don't know if they'll be offended or maybe you don't have that trust to be able to ask those tough questions. But how do you get past that hurdle of, well, I want to ask something about this other culture or other race that I don't know much about, and I really want to learn, but I don't want to offend them by saying it wrong. And I don't, like, if I don't have friends or someone close to me in that group, how do I do that without just saying, like, finding someone in the street and asking them? I don't know.
I understand. I'll come back to some specific strategies. So I have like some specific kind of low risk ways that you can entertain and like introduce yourself to those kind of conversations. But to respond immediately, some of it is challenging yourself to be uncomfortable and be in spaces that you otherwise wouldn't be in, and to like be around people that you're not so comfortable being around. And it could be that you're not comfortable being around them, not because of some prejudice or some issue, but because you're afraid you're going to say the wrong thing. I know in my own experience in my work, one of my most talented master's students this year is gender nonconforming, and they do not use gender binary pronouns. And I've gotten that right like 7 times. That was number 7. And so part of what I've done to expand and develop in that space is to meet them in their space. They work in the LGBTQ Resource Center at Mizzou, and coming to the programming, listening to the ways that the people interact, it's helped me develop my language. And given permission, like, hey, this is what I think, and I might get this wrong, and trust that it's this, not this. But I'm gonna fail a little bit. I need permission to fail because I want to show up and I want to support you in the way that you desire to be supported. And so some of it is kind of us taking responsibility for that vulnerability and that feeling. I know that one of the hardest things for me as a person is to feel like I'm in a space where I don't know enough. Like if I don't know enough, I'm like, this is uncomfortable. Somebody might ask me something and I'm gonna have to dance away, stage right. But that dissonance that's created from that discomfort, some of the most meaningful learning and the most transformative learning is on the other side of that discomfort. And so sometimes we have to challenge ourselves to kind of stand in it and be ready to be wrong. I think that's directly related to like the last two, which is skill and aspiration gaps. And so we can aspire to have, and I think we typically do. So every mission statement for every organization, at least like every modern organization, has something about equity and diversity and support and love and uplift. But how we actually go from espoused value to enacted value is difficult. And we can aspire to these really great things, but what are we doing? Are we putting the resources into it? Like, if we say that mentoring matters for our organization, are we putting money behind it? Are there professional developments? If there are professional developments, are people actually coming to them? Are they being rewarded for coming to them? And so like the way that you change organizations and you change culture, some of it is about, all right, well, what are the policies around this? If it's in your performance review that you've attended X number of trainings and like you've worked to evolve in these certain ways, people are much more likely to do it because it becomes a cultural expectation. If it's it would be nice if you go, then people are gonna be like, it'd be nice if I got my work done. Like that's the way it goes. And so some of that is us closing those gaps, like closing the gaps between what we aspire to and what actually is our practice on a daily basis. I wanted to offer this as like somebody that navigated this space really quickly. And so part of the way that I approach work about socialization and mentoring and belonging has to do with images. And so symbols that are around us all the time. So symbolically, you can come into an organization and if every face that you see is a certain type of face, you kind of know like, I might not belong here, or like if I do belong here, I don't belong in leadership. And so I was looking at the walls, I walked around. Well, I didn't want to get in trouble with Paul, so I came here early. But I had my phone, I was like, whoosh, whoosh, just taking pictures. I was like, where do I see black faces? There's a painting in the cafeteria of a black railway worker. And then there's this young black child underneath the word disease. That's what I found. This is a black man, but I could only tell after I got closer. Because I was like, oh, your hair looks a little bit like, yeah, got that good stuff. So I was like, oh. But this is a wall of white and Asian men, prominently featured. You can't miss it when you're walking downstairs and you're going to the cafeteria. The history of understanding, the bolded word, like knowledge production. White. And then this was interesting to me. So coming across, I was like, oh, like this is probably one of the founding scientists of NCAR-UCAR. Nope, it's the person that designed the building. Now, he's rich and he's dope, and he also designed the pyramid outside the Louvre. So it was cool, like reading it. I was like, But it didn't. After I got close enough to investigate, I was like, this doesn't make me feel like minoritized populations, their contribution to this space is any better than I thought it was before. And so some of the messages that we're sending by accident. Like, I see some head nods, but how many of you were like, yo, can we get some pictures of some of these other scientists up here? Is that possible? Yeah, and so part of the benefit of like being an outsider to an organization is that like you get to see some things that people have just kind of filed away. Like it's just normal. You guys probably don't even see those pictures anymore. Like when I buy them, like, I'm just going to get fish tacos, which I heard were flavorless, but whatever. there are ways that we show what matters without saying a word, without connecting to a singular person. And so to me, if I just come and I'm only using the lens of mentoring and belonging, and I walk these halls, it's very easy to feel like women and people of color don't really belong here. Their contributions aren't highlighted. If they are, they might be a participant, or like they're the person sitting in the row that's being talked to by the scientist. I have plenty of other pictures, but for time's sake, I'll move on. But if you see these are the images, these are the unexamined things that are being communicated. So when somebody comes, like youth groups come and they're doing the museum part of this, I love that cloud thing when you come in the door. I touch it every time, I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, trying to make little tornadoes. But I was thinking about that too. Like, okay, if I brought my children here, like my 6-year-old and my 8-year-old, would they even notice? Or would it be, oh, this is what we're used to. In science museums, there aren't really pictures of women and people of color like that. So like there's nothing to really examine. We had to think about like the environment too. And so this connection to obstacles is really about the different levels that these obstacles appear and like the ability that we have to influence them. And so sometimes it's at the institutional level, sometimes it's at the departmental level, and sometimes it's at the individual level. Go ahead.
We had a comment from online that said, asking if anyone in the room has been to the student union at CSU in Fort Collins. They've made an impressive effort to present a variety of faces on their walls, and it made a deep impression on me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Zhenya from communications.
So that's evidence of it being done right. And evidence of the impact that happens when something that we easily can ignore just in our everyday, how it can impact somebody. I think sometimes when we talk about obstacles, we have to think about levels. And so sometimes people aren't good citizens because they're just not good people. Like, I've worked with whack people. You just want to get them fired. And so you're like, what do I need to record? What kind of performance improvement plan do I need to write? Like, how many meetings with HR do I need to get through before we can get this person away from me? Or can we like redesign everything and they just don't report to me anymore? Sometimes it's the department. So it could be, and I didn't ask you guys to share out yet because it's more, I want you to consider and think about it. It could be that some people are doing a really good job. And so if we're thinking specifically about mentoring, it could be that in the computer science space, we're doing a really great job, but in the space lab space, we're not doing a really great job. Or it could be, as an organization, there's a lot to be desired, and we need to work together because the problems actually appear at all of the levels. And so that's one of the things I want us to think about briefly too. And so I'm glad that people stayed in relatively close proximity in their groups. So if there are challenges, and I heard you, so I know there are, where do they appear? Like, what level are they at? Is it the institutional level? Is it the departmental level? Is it personal? Or is it some combination? And this exercise is really because you can't make any meaningful change if you don't identify the problem. So where's it showing up? And what ideas do you have with the knowledge that we have collected in this room about how to overcome those obstacles? So I like the bigger groups that you guys made. We'll do that. Put 5 minutes on the clock. Oh, thank you so much. All right. As you guys bring your conversations to a close, I'd ask you to record some of the higher value issues that you thought about in your groups. And I want to make some space to discuss that. I heard some really robust conversations going on, talking about anything from the history of science and like this generation of scientists to what needs to happen to reframe organizations in the image that we want. I even heard some commentary about retirement and how some people probably should retire, but they don't. Oh no, I'm a classroom teacher. If I'm looking at a group, I can hear them. I don't know when it happened. It feels like a superpower, but yeah. So I wanna offer a space to go over that before I start offering some ideas and some potential solutions. So I accidentally revealed this slide a little bit too early. But let's spend a little bit of time here because this is some of the important stuff and some of the knowledge that needs to be shared across the organization.
So before I stand up and offer it to the room, we have one comment online from Joanna. She said, I see these obstacles at all levels and propose that help will come with breaking silos, building community and identity, repairing trust through transparent and frequent communication, and teaching and modeling the language and behavior of appreciation.
Ooh, you trying to steal my thunder?
She hit on like everything.
I was like, did I preview that much? Other thoughts?
You guys want to jump in? Okay. Well, our team, we discussed the idea of having multiple mentors, so kind of like an army of mentors, where you can spread the load in a way. Yeah, that's what we were talking about. And we also, I guess, I don't know, saw that it could be if the leadership at the very top incentivizes and encourages these mentoring roles, and then maybe it'll happen. Like if you have an activity and then the head of the lab shows up, like, hey, he's taking this seriously, or she, or they.
We appreciate you.
Other thoughts?
So our group, we kind of established that complacency and having a lot of extremes between, I guess, people just entering the workforce and people that should probably have retired 15 years ago and kind of not having a lot of that in between, and just the overall time it takes to be a quality mentor, are challenges within the organization. And we discussed that probably the root cause is, as has kind of been mentioned, just the lack of community between each of the facilities and divisions. Other parts of it are making mentorship valued by the organization and having it in a position description, as well as having a developed training program on how to be an effective mentor for supervisors and leaders and just anyone that wants to be a mentor. We also discussed, what else did we discuss? Did we write it down? We also said, making time and financial incentives for people that want to be mentors. Of if you're, if your department's not bringing in a lot of money and you have to get papers written or you have to get research grants proposed, it's like, well, I don't have time to be a mentor. And then once I have a mentor, I'm just going to give them really easy work and have them twiddle their thumbs for the 75% of their time and not really have it a benefit. So
yeah, that can be difficult.
Those are what we mentioned.
This just came to thought as Reva was speaking over there. What about organizations incentivizing when they promote people, especially in university settings or research? People are promoted and they may not want to be a mentor, but people are promoted and the organization has an expectation that they need to mentor and they're going to manage their new group, and they may not want to do that. maybe a better understanding if you're going to go to in the leadership within an organization. There's an understanding that you need to mentor. You need to take time out of your schedule to develop your staff and have a vested interest in them, and maybe have a mentoring program within the staff. I believe new scientists coming in this organization, they're just kind of dropped into an office and they're left to fight for themselves. And without an admin assistant guiding them a little bit, there's no mentorship on how to navigate what they're going to do here. They kind of sink or swim maybe for the first year.
Yeah.
And like on your slides, good mentorship shows a better health in an organization. And if a new scientist came in, was mentored right away, you would see that.
Yeah.
And maybe less frustration.
Yeah, that orientation piece of it, it's something that people feel like is a little bit hokey at times. But I do think onboarding and orientation is a huge part of it. It's one of the ways that mentoring can really show up in ways that are transformative for the entirety of somebody's membership in an organization.
Have you ever seen companies as they promote people? There's an
Yeah,
expectation
and
that
so
they're
some
more
of
of
what
a
you're
mentor?
talking about is it's difficult, and so what you're talking about is very specific to academic organizations in some ways. And so when you have groups of scientists or you have people who the overarching reward system is based on individual performance, it's difficult to make them step back and think about communal goals. And so I do a lot of mentoring that doesn't show up on my CV. And when it comes time for tenure and promotion, they're going to be, how many did you publish and what quality of journal did you publish in? They're not going to say, look, you wrote 10 recommendations for people that are now in PhD programs, or you helped, this many students graduate with their PhD. You demystified the process of writing a dissertation for this many students. And I think that that's part of the cultural change that's needed, like the recognition that some of those things are different. But also, I think that some of the issues with promotion particularly, and one of the ways that organizations need to reframe themselves, is to make it clear that if you were promoted in this way, part of your new role and expectations is to mentor. And so maybe the way that you got to that position of leadership was by being insular and working really hard on your individual science and your work. But when you take on new responsibility, part of the new responsibility is for you to share your wealth and your experience and your knowledge with the larger part of the community. And sometimes people don't get that memo. And it happens, I know, one of the ways it manifests in faculty life is once you get tenured, now you're open to all the service opportunities. You're expected to serve and protect junior faculty members by sitting on this committee and that committee that meet on Tuesday and Wednesday, right in the middle of your writing time. And so people are like, I want tenure, but how am I going to do the things that excite me? How am I going to continue to focus on my science in the way that I wanted to before? And so managing that transition, because it is a transition. Promotions are also a transition. We think of transitions a lot. So I'm a college student researcher. So we always think about transitions between, so the transition from high school to college, the transition from undergrad to graduate school, the transition from graduate school to professional positions, or the transition from undergrad to professional positions. I don't think enough attention is paid to the transitions that happen over the career and within. So if you get promoted within an organization, you're making a transition, and that transition needs scaffolding. It needs support. It needs somebody to be thoughtful and intentional about how your life and your role and your goals are going to change. And that's kind of part of this. So I want to share some best practices, and thank you for the contribution. I realized I start getting interested, and I'll be like, oh, I only have 30 minutes left. That big clock is back there, I saw. I want to share some best practices. And so some of the best practices, and this is stuff that you guys can apply, and that some of the knowledge is already in this room, and I really appreciate that. So it's always nice because you realize when you come in with some measure of expertise around things that a lot of the knowledge that you have to share is already in the room. Part of the role is really just to unearth it and hold people accountable for it, have you approach it from a different direction so that you can act on it. And mentoring constellations is really, in terms of emergent theory and work on the best way to mentor, mentoring constellations are really it. And so a mentoring constellation, or this is always also referred to as network mentoring, is the recognition that mentoring doesn't always have to occur in a two-person dyad. It doesn't always have to be a mentor to a mentee. That mentoring and organizations that really excel at mentoring is occurring at every level. And so this is a simplification of kind of the larger one. So Brofenbrenner's ecological systems theory is kind of a backdrop to the development of this theory, and it suggests that there are these extending circles that a mentee exists in. And so there's the mentee, there's their primary set of mentors, and this includes peers and their assigned mentors, any formal or informal relationships with people that they've established. Their secondary mentors, which are members of the community and members of the organization that they can also go to and that they can also share experiences with and get knowledge from, but that are also contributing in meaningful ways to their sense that they can do their job, that they're on the right path, that are also finding ways to avail opportunities to them. And then there's the larger mentoring program culture. And so like I want us to think about that as the organizational culture. So what does the organization expect? How's mentoring showing up? How are they incentivizing it? How are they connecting people to mentors? Is mentoring a formal thing? So when you come into this organization as a new scientist, are you assigned a mentor? And if you're not assigned a mentor, why not? What's going on there? If you want mentoring, but you weren't assigned a mentor, what are the mechanisms that are put in place to make sure that you have an opportunity to build the kind of connections with somebody who would actually be meaningful to your career? When it's a organizational and a cultural expectation, it makes it a lot easier for the lower levels, the more insular levels, the more interpersonal, interconnected levels to work well. So again, just to kind of expand on this idea of mentoring constellations and give some specific examples, primary mentors are the people that are most transformative. And so if you guys all closed your eyes right now, don't do it, and you had to think of mentor, like there's probably a face that flashes in your head. Because I remember from earlier, most of you raised your hand that you have at least one person that you identify as a mentor. And so those transformative relationships, those people that are really close to you, the people that you continue to have a relationship with. So for me, my doctoral advisor, our relationship matured into a mentoring relationship. But the members of my research team, the ones who I was telling you, like picking my son up and stopping him from spilling water on people's laptops, those are also people that I would consider my primary mentoring network, that really close level. So one of them just hit me up while I was here. Was like, we got to revise, resubmit on this article. So, oh, yes. And I'm about to go talk about stuff that's related to it. Let's go. So those relationships are transformative for a number of reasons. One, because as mentorship relationships deepen, whether they're at the peer level or they're at the more traditional level that we typically think of with a mentor, the experiences that you share, the opportunities that you engage in, the ways that you learn more and more about each other, like the best ways to give and receive feedback, the best ways to show up. One of the ones I like a lot is like how people want to be celebrated. You know, so I'm a super extrovert just in terms of my general default. Like I love people. I want to let's give a high five. What? Hugs? I love hugs. But I feel I get like weird when people celebrate me. So like my students are they just did a round of like awards, and so some of my students nominated me for like mentoring awards, and I was like, I should feel good about this because I literally study it, but it feels weird, like I'm just doing my job. I'm just trying to do like what I think is right, and so even like, how do you want to show up? Like, what makes you feel good? Do you want like a $5 Starbucks gift card, or do you want a poster and like a plane? You know? These are important ways that like we build trust and we deepen these relationships, like knowing how people want you to show up, how they what support really feels like to them. Secondary mentors, they're more distant, but they're still important. And so one of the ways that secondary mentors show up for me is really family. And so my wife does not work anywhere near any of the stuff that I do. She works for an insurance company. She's a project manager. They're just trying to get big bucks from people so that they protect things like liability, and the whole jargon scares me because it sounds like State Farm. And she's one of the first people that I have read anything that I write for publication, because if she understands it and it makes sense to her, given the context that she operates in, then it's probably going to make sense to the people that speak the same language that I do and have all the jargon. You know, so intentionality and social justice. And so who are these people? They could be family, they could be spouses, they could be intimate relationships, they could just be friends. Like, who are these people in this secondary network that help support you? And where are they at in the organization? You know, so it's always interesting kind of watching these rooms as they develop. So as people come in and they make decisions about where to sit. So like, I know which one of you talk to each other. I bet you sit together at lunch sometimes. Like all the decisions that we make about like where we sit, who we show up with, who we talk to, who we spend time with, both during our work, but also in that really important informal time in between. That's part of the development of these secondary networks. It's also important the places where we come together. And so I'm excited to have as many people in this room and online as possible, but when else is this happening? You know, and what are the topics? If you're not talking about mentoring and this group of people is assembled, what are you talking about? How often do you get to have the type of individual conversations that you've had to have repeatedly as a part of this workshop with each other outside of a professional development context? Like, those are important things to think about as you think about changing your culture. You've probably learned something about or with or from somebody that's really valuable to you today. And I challenge you that beyond here, if you do nothing else, stay connected. Check in. Like set a reminder in your phone for like a week and a half, 2 weeks, somebody that you enjoyed what they had to say or what they had to offer, like follow up with them. Because that's part of how you create the kind of culture that infuses mentoring throughout. And then specifics. Like what is the program doing? What's the overall organization doing to show that it matters? The people that are showing up as mentors, do they feel valued? Do they feel invested in? Mentoring's hard. Doing it right is hard. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. Learning people, all the great stuff about them, all the not so great stuff about them. And even the fact that when you're in a mentoring relationship, some of the most important development that you do is with yourself. You know, a mentee can be a really important mirror that we hold up to ourselves that helps us understand the ways that we show up that we love and the ways that we want to improve and we want to continue to develop. And so what's happening? Is the organization investing in it? Are they doing the professional developments? Is it part of your performance review? Are there policies that are related to it? Have we developed onboarding processes, for example? Are there orientations? Are the concerns that have been voiced in this room being taken seriously and turning into policy and praxis? So with the time that we have remaining, I want to share some specific things that I use and then some just best practices generally as you think about organizational change and as you think about making mentoring a priority throughout an organization. And so my amazing convention for the ones that actually have their own slides is bold and underline. But quickly, because of the ones that do not, I think that knowing your context is really connected to knowing yourself, and I'll talk about that a little bit. I'll kind of wrap that in there. And the idea of evolution is directly related to assessment and setting the stage and communicating. So those will be things that we cover too. I talked about this a little bit, I previewed it, but I wanted to give some more structure to it today. And so one of the things that I do to help kind of bridge the gaps and attend to the question that was asked earlier about how do you get into these difficult conversations is I'll get people together and we'll do low risk exercises that encourage them to share things that they otherwise would not share or that you otherwise would not know in a way that they don't even realize that they're doing it. And so one of my favorites is a family history exercise. And it's just a little short set of questions to help you understand who somebody is. You know? And what you'll often find is it draws weird connections between people too. So a group this size, there's almost always two people that have the same birthday. It's uncanny if you ask. And we're like, oh, what, really? Like, what? And so little things that help you understand, help you locate people, help you understand the way that they communicate, like their mores, their background. And they can be really simple. So where are you from? Like, what's your hometown? Do you have a hometown? You know, for me, that conversation always ends up going down a funny path because I'm a military brat. And so I've physically set foot in every one of the continental United States. I've lived in 12 states at this point, some multiple times. And yeah, I don't feel like I'm from anywhere. I have a lot of friends that are in New York. I have a lot of friends that are in LA. I have a lot of friends that are in Philadelphia. But people that have that like deep local knowledge are like, oh yeah, they went to high school down the street, or oh, that fire hydrant wasn't there like 2 days ago and that car just ran into it. Like I've never been able to do that. And it's a weird little kind of envious thing that I have for people who've grown up with, know everybody. They know all the police officers, and that's a good thing. Like how many siblings do you have? And not just siblings, because if you have siblings, they probably have an impact on you in some way, whether you love them or you hate them. Well, you love them for sure, but like you might want to slap them all the time. That's the situation with my siblings. You know, how many siblings do you have? What order were you in birth order? You know, if you're the oldest, there are certain things that we know that are research backed about how you operate. So oldest children tend to take on more responsibility for things than they should because they're used to protecting their younger siblings. And that manifests itself in work. That's something that is easy to kind of get at if you ask, like, oh, really? You have a brother and a sister? And you're the oldest? Makes sense. Hobbies, what do you do for fun? Like, to me, I had a colleague, he's from Bermuda, and he's a really devout Seventh-day Adventist. And I just felt like we couldn't connect. Like, we would have conversations, and they would always feel very surface. And then I found out he likes soccer. And he likes the team that's trying to steal the English Premier League from my team. And so now our conversations are so much more robust because he's like showing jerseys and sending me emails like, ugh, your boys almost slipped today. And like now that's given me entry into a whole other aspect of his personality that I otherwise wouldn't have. But that just came from a quick conversation. Like, oh, what do you do? Like, what sports do you follow? Like, really? Sports from youth. If you participated in sports, a lot of us have had a background in whether you're in track and tennis, like more individual sports, or whether you're in more team sports. It's another thing that offers points of connections that people wouldn't really think about. And then we went into this, so I won't reshare, but like some of the unique issues that you faced as a child that like kind of inform who you continue to be today. Like that's another relatively low risk thing, and you'll be surprised at what gets shared. And because people aren't used to being asked a question like that, they'll start to go in their head and they're like, huh, that is why I'm crazy. And because these things, these little aspects of who we are, they're not always invited at work. We feel like there's not space for it, you know. So we don't want to, like, you know, if somebody's like racially ambiguous, you don't want to ask them like, what are you? But if you have platforms for conversations like this, you might be like, oh, well, where are your parents from? And you get that entire history, and it helps you understand them in a much more robust way. So this is just one way that you can know yourself and communicate, but also create the kind of vulnerability and connection that lets you continue to deepen the relationships in a way that you can develop the credibility needed to be a good mentor. Setting the stage, and so this is about kind of some of what we were talking about earlier about the transition in roles. So when a new scientist comes into an organization, or when a scientist gets promoted to a different role that they didn't have before. And so you gotta, no matter what, even if you're mentoring a student, some of the most important things you can do are ask the right questions up front. You know, those first couple of interactions go a really long way for setting trust. And this is another one of the ways that identity really plays into it. Because sometimes people who have been minoritized, and again, this can be anybody. Anybody can feel minoritized. You could be a white man at NCAR and be minoritized because you have views that you feel like are silenced. You could be a person of color. You could be any intersection of anything across the social address and feel like your views aren't being taken seriously. And so part of setting the stage appropriately is asking the right questions and making sure that people have the space and the freedom to show up the way that they need to and that they want to. So simple questions like, why did you choose to work here? There are so many jobs in the world. What brings you to Table Mesa Drive? What do you feel like your contribution is going to be? What do you want it to be? Like, what are people aspiring to when they enter, whether they're a student or a new professional or somebody taking on a new role? How do you find community in your work, but also around your work? How'd you get here? Who helped you? Who pushed you? Who got you interested in this? This is very unique. It's a unique skill set. What are your goals? Not what are my goals for you, but what are your goals? What do you want for yourself? And then, how do you want to receive feedback? You know, I shared yesterday that my mother is a single mother who is in the military, and like every stereotypical thing that you would think about that is true. You know, she likes guns, She doesn't take any back talk. She's a very direct feedback giver. There is no sugar to coat with. And so I've always worked best in organizations where people communicate with me like that. Like, don't dance and like play games with my time. Just tell me what's right and what's wrong and how I can fix it. If something's wrong, tell me that so I can do a better job. I'll ask the questions. Okay, I understand that I'm not meeting the performance expectations here, but what can I do to meet them? Or are you just making that up because you don't like me? Like, I'm comfortable confronting it in that way, but I know that that's a big part of like how I was raised. Not everybody's like that. So some of what you have to do to be a good mentor is figure out, like, what's the best way for us to communicate? Like, how can I not activate any alarm bells that you might have in your head, especially across difference? And so sometimes you'll find there are these unfortunate misattributions to people's behavior because what they're responding to is a lifetime of racism, sexism, being excluded because of their identity. And so they're not willing to trust in a way that other people might be willing to when they come into a situation. And people see that as disengagement, or people see that as they don't want it, or they're not interested in being mentored. Before we jump to those kind of conclusions, we should ask questions like this. And then also, like, how do you want to be celebrated? You know, like, what works? How do I let you know that I think you're doing a good job in a way that doesn't make you feel weird and icky, but that encourages you to continue to do a good job? The other side of it, especially if you're showing up as a mentor, is making sure that you're clear about your expectations and your goals. And this is one of the ways that I failed in my own role. I had to fail to get it right. And so I had a graduate assistant my first year who was bounced around to a bunch of different professors. And me being me, I was like, Psh, I'm a great mentor. Give me anything and I'll do a great job with it. And no, I couldn't. It was personal. If we're talking about levels, it was a personal level of you think that your skills are different than they actually are, and you don't understand what your role is. And as a graduate assistant, your job is to help me get tenure. And so show me how you've helped me get tenure over this 6-month period, over this 12-month period. And it wasn't until we had that very real conversation that that person was like, you're right. They fixed their performance review. They gave themselves all the lowest marks that were appropriate. And I signed it and we submitted it and we came up with a plan to get better. And I can say with happiness and confidence that even though he doesn't fit in my team research atmosphere, we've been doing some really strong work individually outside of that space. But we wouldn't even have had the opportunity to do it had we not had that feedback session. And when I reflect on it, one of the things that I did wrong is that I should have started with that. If I showed him, here are the performance expectations. Here's what the evaluation looks like. Here's how you're going to be judged for your work in our time together. Here's what I prefer. If you need to get in contact with me, this is the best way to do it. If you need feedback on something, this is the best way to request it. If you need help with something, you need to get unstuck. Here's how you can get in contact with me. I didn't do enough to set the expectations as a mentor. I didn't share enough about what I see as professionalism, about what I see as the right way to go about building our relationship, whether it is destined to mature into a mentorship or it's just going to remain a supervisory relationship. Also, like, how can you demystify your organization for somebody that's new? And so this is another thing that's important to share, especially for people that have been in an organization for a long time. Part of the protection that you're going to be able to offer to a mentee, whether they're a student or a new professional, is to say, hey, this is how things go. This funding might disappear. So I've heard a lot of kind of chatter about like grant funding. And I was like, oh man, I feel like I'm at my university home. Because you could have a job and the grant could not get renewed and you need to be ready for that. And that has happened to me. That's something to share. That's something to help people think about. Not to scare them, but to prepare them appropriately. One of the best ways that you can protect somebody is by arming them with the information so that they can start to develop contingency plans. And so like this, what are the knowledges that you've developed that are worthy and worth sharing so that you can push somebody to greater levels of performance. Be accessible. And so accessibility can be difficult. And so I heard you speaking about accessibility a little bit earlier. So like, oh, I'm going to give you like crumbs of things to do because I need to focus on writing this really complex grant that you can't help me with. But some of it is setting the access expectations. And so it could be, hey, we have a standing meeting on Friday. So you know that if no other day, you're going to get your questions answered at this time. Or, hey, I don't feel like we need to meet that often, but you can reach out and you can touch me through cell phone or through other modes of communication anytime that you need. I think it's always good to ask for input. So like, how often do you feel like you want to get in touch with me? You can offer some structure. So like, I think weekly meetings would be good to start, and then we can figure it out from there. But the idea that a mentee feels like they can get in touch with and access their mentor is really worthwhile to invest in and to think about explicitly as well. Then when you have those meetings, make sure you're asking the right questions there. And so some of the right questions in regular meetings are about performance and goals, and are you moving your project forward? Are you writing the things that you need to be writing? How are things going? Like, are your cultures growing? But it's also about checking in with them as a person. Like, how was your week? How are things going? Are you good? Is your family good? Are your kids good? All the things we learned from the other exercise. Because that really affects people. Somebody has a sick kid at home, it can be difficult to concentrate. If somebody's partner is going through something like they just had surgery, like it can be difficult. And so checking in, it gives people an opportunity to share in ways that oftentimes we've learned not to share. Like, oh, I don't want to burden people with my problems, so I'm just not going to say anything. But those burdens affect your performance, and people that care about you and that want to support you need to know about it. It's also this invitation piece. And so like, what do you need and how can I help? You might not have all the answers, but if you know what people feel like they need and you offer yourself as an agent of support, that really goes a long way. And so even though people might not take you up on it, and often people don't, like, hey, like, one of the ones that happens to me all the time with my doctoral students is like financial. So like, I'm broke. And I'll be like, do you need some money? Like, no. But I know that it matters. Like, I know that it helps them. Like, oh, okay, if I actually do need it, like, this is somebody that I can go to. And there are people that show up for us in our life in a lot of different ways that are offering that kind of stuff too. I want to close us out by thinking about strategies for mentoring across difference. And so part of that is the continual dedication to learning about the ways that people that are not like you navigate the world. Recognize the stereotypes. Recognize what they might be facing both inside these walls and outside these walls. Some of that is asking questions, some of that is sharing, some of that is just being good colleagues, developing relationships. But also recognize that just because people share identity categories does not mean that they're experiencing life the same way. So because you're a white woman or because you're a black gay man, doesn't mean that your experiences are the same as the next black gay man. Appreciating individual differences means caring enough about the person on a personal level to know that the environment might be affecting them in different ways. For me, if I lived in Boulder full time, I wouldn't feel any different than when I lived in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, or when I live in Columbia, Missouri right now. Some of the stuff that was a shock to me at first, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a college town. And there's lots of whites and granola and mountains. And like, that's what it is. But appreciating that somebody that looks exactly like me, has 2 kids, maybe has been divorced, could be plopped down into the same space and feel completely out of place. Like, whoa, there's nothing here for me. And it's not what I experienced. They don't have as good a food as DC. They don't have, And so we need to be able to appreciate individual differences. But I think from an organizational standpoint, like the 2 that I've highlighted is manifest diversity, promoting attitudes and behaviors, and work to enhance cross-cultural competence. These are things that organizations can dedicate themselves to. And I think that if you do those, then the other ones tend to happen. So the establishing trust and the listening for preferences if you create spaces where people are thinking about and pushing on these ideas, then you're going to start to establish that trust. You're going to have the voices that need to be heard. And so specifically, you got to promote this stuff. You have to. It can't die in a workshop. In organizations with the demographic makeup of this one, because I've seen you guys' numbers, you have to mentor across difference. It's not an option. There aren't enough people with the intersections of identities to match somebody with somebody that has the same identity. So we have to learn how to traverse those differences in productive ways. Celebrate people who are doing a good job of it. And that's at the organization level. Like, it's great when you hear and like the conversations get had and you can hear the same names kind of coming up. But those people need to know that they're doing a good job. They need to be celebrated. If there's financial incentive, like, oh, we have a $5,000 mentoring award. That's great. I would apply for it. How is the organization making sure that these strong practices are being put front and center? And challenge the stereotypes by listening and by creating spaces where people feel like they can be listened to. And some of that is small groups. So, I was like, hey, people report out. And you guys were like, no. But everybody was talking in the smaller groups. And so how do we create those smaller groups? Inside and outside of our departments, across the organization. How do we rotate the people that we talk to and that we spend time with? One of the really cool programs that I've seen is a lunch program. So it's a faculty development tool that they use at a university that I've done some work with. And what they'll do is they'll scan people's CVs and they'll see that there are synergies that they didn't really realize between their work, and they'll pay to send them to lunch in groups. And so that's how they're building interdepartmental collaboration, because somebody in education is going to lunch with somebody in engineering, is going to lunch with somebody in anthropology, and now they're winning grants together and all that. All the stuff that people hear you say, like, interdisciplinary work is really valued. Put your money where your mouth is. Sometimes that money is going to be lunch. Sometimes it's going to be bigger, more structured programs. But if you don't intentionally create those spaces, it's not going to happen. Come to stuff like this. Invest time, energy, resources in spurring, pushing, creating spaces where these conversations can take place. Invest in histories. And so I want to highlight the second one, because oftentimes we're so pressed and interested in hearing about, like, oh, like, I don't want to step in and say the wrong thing to this minoritized group or like this person. But like, we don't interrogate whiteness. Like, that needs to be thought about too. If white people are the majority of the United States and then the majority of scientific organizations, but we don't think about like what it means to be white, what it means to be silenced because you're white, how are we going to progress? It's going to be more of the same. And so we shouldn't just be thinking about histories and values for minoritized populations. We should also be thinking about that for majority populations. And really make a commitment. And so the individual one-on-one commitments are easy. And maybe those primary relationships are also kind of easy, because people that you spend time with, people that you feel comfortable around, people that you've developed mentoring relationships with, you can really share, and you can develop a deep knowledge of what's happening with them. What are the concerns? I remember, for me specifically, I saw so many support groups form when Trump got elected. Like, there's just people like, people that never talked to each other before, like, started hugging each other. But like, how are these unique things that are going on in the world affecting people differently? And like, are we creating forums and spaces where we can talk about that and we can connect and we can push and deepen our relationships around those things? We don't have time for this moment for reflection, but I want you to think about this, and it's actually a good thing to leave on. How are you doing it? Like if you know, given the nature of your organization, that it's necessary to mentor across difference, ignoring the differences isn't going to get anything done. Like, how are you engaging them? And how do you make sense of whether they even want to talk about it? We got to stop giving ourselves permission to not even breach the conversation because it's uncomfortable. And to be deliberate and intentional about mentoring means to be deliberate and intentional about the difficult conversations. Thank you all for your participation and your time. And I'll be here for questions if anybody has them.
So we just had a comment come in from Joanna. She wanted to remind everybody that we do in fact have a mentoring award through the UCAR Awards that come out in December. So if there's anybody that you want to nominate for that, she encourages you to do that. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Joanna at the president's office and she will let you know how that works. If I understand that folks probably need to head out, but if there's anybody who wants to stay and ask any questions, we can certainly do that.